Hi, Freda. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Kat. Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion?
Certainly. I'm Freda Sampson. I am the project manager for Michigan Roundtable, and I've been with them about 2 years. And the project that I'm managing is called the Housing Project Truth and Justice. And it's a project that deals with the issues of race and housing in Metro Detroit. We are currently in our second phase of this project, with our first phase being a mock trial and an exhibit, and now we're in a truth and reconciliation process.
So let's go back to phase one, because
Sure.
the mock trial, I believe, was last fall.
It was last October.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about what that was, what was on trial, and what was the verdict?
Well, the mock trial was really about examining and acknowledging the history of race and housing in Michigan, beginning from the first migration around 1910, moving forward to the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And we decided to take a fairly narrowed scope by looking at the legal lens and looking at how the federal government was involved in creating the segregated communities that we have, not only in Michigan, but that kind of perpetuated themselves throughout the United States. And we did that with Wayne State University. We teamed up with them, and in preparing for the mock trial, which took about 8 months, we coordinated our efforts with the University of Michigan law students, and we engaged a number of members throughout the community that had extraordinary history around this subject. And what we realized was that there's so much history and there's so much information that have absolutely affected our communities that we couldn't do it all within the context of a mock trial. So we did, in conjunction with the mock trial, we created a traveling exhibit. And so on October 15th, we presented to the community our traveling exhibit that dealt with that spanned a period, 1910 to 1968. And we did it at MOCAD. And then the following day, we had a mock trial at Wayne State University, where we streamed it live online, where we had school children that were tracking along with us, that weighed in via the internet. And it was really an extraordinary moment, because it gave everyone an opportunity, those who participated in the project and those who were observing the project, a different perspective of how the Federal Housing Administration really affected and influenced the policies that drove this community to be as segregated as it is today.
So can you tell us a little bit about what those were, and for somebody that doesn't have any understanding of that project or what happened in that period of history, what were the main pieces that people should be aware of that might not be, as it relates to how we got to where we are today? That was kind of a roundabout way to go asking you that question.
Well, let me see if I can tackle it. The Federal Housing Administration, upon its inception in 1934, had specific policies in their underwriting manual indicating that communities should be homogenous, and that there was a ranking system that indicated the value of certain communities. So if it were all a white community, it would fare well with the Federal Housing Administration, and funding would be available to build those communities. If it were all black community, it virtually never fared well. And so communities of color did not receive the same benefit and support from the government that all white communities received. And so what that meant was that there was a clear indication that white communities did not want people of color moving into their neighborhoods, because that was going to affect their perceived concept of value of their home, their communities, their schools, their job opportunities. And so all of that continued to create racial segregation by restrictive covenants, by redlining, by blockbusting. All of these things became the usual, the norm. And that's not to put just all the emphasis on the Federal Housing Administration, because obviously it was not just them. It was the real estate agents, it was businesses, it was insurance companies, it was the financial institutions, and it was the individuals who believed that it was better to keep people of color and people who were white separated. And so this history is something that, when it's revealed to us that our federal government was engaged in deliberate policies and practices to keep us segregated, it's really quite startling. And what's fascinating is when people hear this information for the first time, it drives them with a real intense emotion, one way or the other, because you just don't think that that could be. And yet it was, and it continues to affect who we are today.
So from the 1D perspective, going to today, we look at an indicator under the race relations, race equity area called the Black-White Dissimilarity Index. And for the 2009 scorecard, it showed that of all the metropolitan areas that we're looking at, 54 in total, Detroit ranked second, almost dead last, second only to Gary, Indiana. So why was Detroit, do you think, more disproportionately affected maybe than other communities, or have we not just overcome what was our history as it relates to that to be where we are today, still so segregated?
You know, Detroit was unique in that there was such an extraordinary influx during the migrations because of our industry, the auto industry. And when we then evolved towards urban renewal and businesses, the building of the cars was moved out of the city and people traveled to be close to their jobs. And that traveling was, that ability to move from city to suburb, to be close to job opportunity, to be close to housing, better housing, was limited to just people who were not of color. Then we, in essence, created a forced segregation that cannot be turned around overnight by any stretch of the imagination. And by virtue of that segregation, we have instilled upon our psyche kind of our moral compass of what is right and what is okay, and we have settled for what is okay. So I think we're at a critical place, certainly in part because we are in the midst of another housing crisis. We have an opportunity to get it right or to get it better, but it will be contingent upon those in leadership, regional cooperation and collaboration, and individuals who are willing to understand that we do better when we live with each other than when we live apart from each other. And until we really get there, it's going to be hard to move from where we've been, you know. So we are, yes, we continue to be, well, we'll see what the 2010 census says, but we do continue to be one of the most segregated communities in this country.